Hello, my name is Donna Granata. Welcome to this segment of Focus on the Masters Portrait of an Artist. Focus on the Masters is a nonprofit arts education program documenting many of the artists who reside within Ventura County, California. We document these extraordinary artists and their work through photographic portraits, audio and video interviews, and biographical research that encompasses each artist's experiences, artistic reflections, and development. We then present this work to a broad public through educational programs like the one you are about to see, along with our Learning to See youth outreach, a monthly Meet the Artist series, regular exhibitions, publications, and an extensive resource library. Portions of this program were recorded in front of a live audience at the Technology Development Center located in the city of Ventura. We hope you enjoy the program, and we thank you for your generous support. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Bob Privitt to our program. Welcome, Bob. Thanks for being here. What a wonderful welcome from the audience. It's such a big group tonight.
I'm very honored.
Oh, well, it's a testimony to how much you're loved in the community, so welcome. We always start at the beginning, and I'm not sure how many people are familiar with your childhood. It's a very sensitive subject and a very difficult subject to bring up. So you shared with me you just wanted to start with that and get it out on the open and start there. So share with us some of the early days of Bob Privitt.
On July the 26th, 1938, I was born in Arkansas in a log cabin, a town called Clarksville, near Clarksville. My mother was a housewife. My father started out as a farmer, then later became an auto mechanic, and he owned a shop, an automotive shop. He later became an iron worker. I have an older sister, 2 years older. She contracted polio early and was basically ignored for the rest of her childhood. I have a younger sister who's about 3 or 4 years younger, and then much later, a younger brother, 8 or 10 years younger.
And I understand it was not a peaceful household.
No. My mother was a member of the Church of Christ and was basically a religious fanatic. My father was an atheistic Baptist.
And we laugh, but ironically, those contradictory themes seem to be a running aspect of your life.
There is no way to describe it any other way. My father was an evil man. He used to beat me until the blood would run down my legs and get into my shoes and cause my socks to be sticky. I use a lot of engineering and math and physics in some of my work, and my father taught me math by setting me down at the kitchen table with my little Indian head tablet, my little yellow number 2 lead pencil, and my little math book, and he would stand behind me and say, "Read the problem." I would read the problem. What is the answer? And I didn't know the answer, and I would hazard a guess, and it would be wrong, and my father would get so furious that he would grab the hair on the back of my head and slam my face into the book and snap my head back and say, "Read the problem again." And his approach to teaching was through brutality and fear.
And at a young age, you had the presence of mind to know that this was not a healthy situation, not a healthy, normal, loving, that this was not a healthy form of love.
Right.
And that is very unique in that in the house of abused children, often they grow up thinking that is love, and they repeat the cycle over and over again. How is it that you had the presence of mind to realize that this was not a healthy situation?
I asked my grandfather, who loved me, why does my father beat me? And the first time I asked him, I thought he hadn't heard me. And he smoked a pipe, and he spends a lot of time filling his pipe, and he was doing that. And finally I asked him again, and he turned and looked at me and said, I don't know. And I have since asked all of his other children, my aunts and uncles, there are 9 of them, did my grandfather beat my father? And they said no. Did my grandfather ever beat any of you? And they said no. And so I don't know where his violence came from.
And in fact, you were the only one among your siblings that was beaten.
I think it was because my older sister had polio, and she was basically ignored. My younger sister was the apple of my father's eye, and they were girls. They stayed inside the house and did things inside the house. My job was to deal with milking the cows and slopping the hogs and feeding the chickens and taking care of the crops and chopping wood and bringing in coal for the coal stove and bringing in water from the well and emptying the chamber pots and doing other things.
Sounds like you were pretty busy.
Except that frequently I would float out of my body and begin to kind of dream. And that was one form of escape. Mm-hmm. I actually had, I would say, two other ways of escape. The most important one was through my art, and the next most important one was through my grandfather.
And we have a picture of both men. So here's what your father looked like. And then here is a wonderful picture of your loving grandfather.
Yes.
And how was it that your grandfather could come into the home, and what would he do to help you escape and provide you with kind of a safe haven?
The most important thing that he did, the physical thing, was he brought me a pocket knife every time he came to visit. And it would be a good pocket knife. It would be an old-timer, an Uncle Henry, or a Buck or a Barlow. And he taught me how to whittle, to carve little animals. He taught me how to make a slippery elm bark whistle. He taught me bird calls. He taught me how to talk to a dove. Mm-hmm. Not to call a dove, to talk to a dove.
So he fed your imagination as a child and gave you that gift of allowing your mind to take you away and
Yes.
to imagine and to create and literally put you on the path to your art career.
Yes.
So to document your home, you did create, much later, a sculpture of your log cabin, the home in which you were born.
Right.
Describe this piece.
Well, I didn't have a picture of that cabin. It's long since destroyed. But I decided to create this sculpture. It's a cabin made of bones, and you'll notice that it has no door and no windows. And it becomes, in effect, a kind of a whited sepulcher mm-hmm. made of dead men's bones. I think it has to do, to a certain extent, with the absurdity of my existence at that time. There were moments when my father was beating me and dealing with me that I thought that I would die. I thought that I would no longer exist. And for a 7-8-year-old to be confronted with death, it changed my attitude toward life.
And when you look at the overall body of work and your development as an artist, you have these themes that almost allow you to purge these emotions into three-dimensional form. Thank goodness for your grandfather and your grandmother. What do you think would have happened had you not had their influence in your life?
I would be either dead or in the pen. I think the thing that I most wanted to be as a child was an orphan. I just wanted to be away. And my grandfather and my grandmother gave me, to a certain extent, a moment of salvation, a way of escape, a moment of freedom. So I knew that there was a possibility that this could happen.
Right.
They were loving and gentle and kind, in contrast to my parents.
You also had another form of escape, and that was reading. Reading was acceptable, right?
Yes. Both my mother and my father liked to read. And for me to read, that was a legitimate escape or excuse to be involved in.
And as a safety zone, I would imagine you read a lot.
Yes.
And, you know,
yes.
I'd have a book in my back pocket constantly if I were you.
Yes.
And so as you started to develop an aesthetic and a sense of aesthetic and form, and you started to draw in high school, and you shared with me that you were drawing all along as well?
Yes. I drew all the time, and I floated out of my body and escaped the physical reality of my existence. And of course that created a lot of conflict with my parents, because I was supposed to be working, and playing or escaping was, you weren't working, you were being engaged in frivolous activities.
And at that time, your concept of art was quite different than what it is today.
Yes. During my high school period, most of the attitude of the various teachers was, if it's real, it's right. The goal was to create something to appear to be as realistic as you possibly could. The objective was to do an analytical type drawing. You were involved in the recording of information. And of course, you developed a lot of technical skills in doing that, but there weren't very many what I would call conceptual approaches. And
that came later.
Yes.
And in the meantime, you were working as an iron worker?
Yes, out of high school, I became a journeyman iron worker and welder. I started out as a connector, and these shots here are some of the things that I used to be able to do. Now that I'm pushing 70, I don't know that I could.
But it certainly gave you a sense of balance.
Yes.
And gave you the skills, the ironworking skills that are essential to your work today.
Right. I didn't learn any mechanical skills, fabrication skills, welding skills from my father. He was just such a violent man, and he had no patience with me. But I served my apprenticeship, and I was working on the job, actually working in the potash mines in Carlsbad, New Mexico. And I came in contact with a Sioux Indian who was about 5 feet 4 inches tall. His name was Bob, which is a great name. And Indian Bob taught me what I would call seat of the pants physics, seat of the pants math, and seat of the pants architectural skills. The idea of being able to visualize and to cause something to actually happen. And he was the one who trained me. This shot we're looking at now is the Glen Canyon Dam. I worked on the west spillway. If you look at the image, the top part leads down to the Grand Canyon. The water in the lower register is actually Lake Powell. And I worked on the right-hand spillway, the west spillway.
And again, giving you these skills that were being built up, and the influence of Indian Bob, and again, going back to this sense of balance and working as an iron worker, we have this charming image of you and your daughters. Here's the first one.
We didn't have a camera for our first child, Russ, but I would do this with him. Norma didn't know it at the time. But one of the truly amazing things about children is that they don't have a lot of fear. Fear is something that has been brought to them at a later time. And so they had complete trust in my ability to hold them up, and at a very young age.
And this, of course, you mentioned your wife, Norma.
Yes.
And today is your anniversary.
Yes.
And tell us how many years. Yes.
We have enjoyed 45 years of wedded bliss. And 45 out of 47 ain't half bad. Without Norma, I would be deader in the pen. She is my rock, she's my anchor. When the hot sand on my feet causes me to think about the fever dream of life, and when my moon clock is marking time with a lunatic, I go to Norma for a long, tall, cool drink of water.
Oh.
She quenches my thirst every day.
Oh, how beautiful. Oh. And you are so lucky to be, to have someone with a wholesome, loving relationship. And, because your concept of love and stability and what family is, you were wired so differently. And how is it that you were able to bridge over into, I realized there was that 2-year span of detoxification there, perhaps. Yeah. Do you attribute a lot of it to Norma, or,
yes. Absolutely. One of the things young people don't understand when they get married is that it's not going to be perfect every day, but Norma has the ability to love me even at my most unlovableness. And without her, I couldn't exist.
So let's skip forward into college and talk about a really pivotal moment when you were in college and this idea of art being right and realism and so forth.
Okay.
What jarred your mind?
Okay, I had, in my undergraduate program, it was, if it's real, it's right. When I went to the University of Tulsa for my master's degree, that quickly crumbled because I realized that there were many different teachers with many different points of view. And so I knew that I wasn't going to make it in graduate school if I didn't go to the library. So I went to the TU library, sat on the floor, and I read book after book after book. And two of the works that stunned me, that really messed my mind up, I would say that it was a form of an epiphany. The first one was René Magritte's Ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe. Well, in my training, real is right. I could look at that. Yes, that's a pipe. Why are you telling me that it is not a pipe? And I struggled with that. And then the second piece, which is Cadeau, it's by Man Ray. Now, whether he had this in mind or not, I don't know. But I thought of it this way. Man Ray took a normal object that you would find in every home, a smoothing iron. And then he took a set of tacks. I think they're either 13 or 17, I don't remember. But he attached those to the face of the iron. And in doing so, he took a functional item and a functional item joined them together in the concept of the juxtaposition of disparate elements to create new meaning. And by creating that image, he denied the function of the smoothing iron, and he denied the function of the tacks as holding devices, and instead it became an element or an item that would literally shred the fabric of society. And that's what happened in the First World War.
And of course, Dada was in full bloom at that time, and Man Ray was a member of the Dada movement.
Correct.
And this idea of art of the absurd and the reflection the artists were giving of that time in our history. Right. Certainly the World War and World War I specifically, and the response to the war. So it stands to reason Magritte, a surrealist, and Man Ray, a Dadaist, would resonate with you. Yes. Because your world was a world of the absurd, and this idea of, the disparate, emotions and, right. This craziness. Right. So,
but there was a problem. I had a problem because I did not assimilate those ideas at that point. Mm-hmm. I fell back onto my ironworking tradition, mm-hmm. working with welding and fabrication. And the next pieces then end up showing that, because I wasn't really incorporating those Dada and Surrealist ideas into the work.
Well, and it's an interesting thing to ponder, because we collectively as artists, as we evolve, we digest these various experiences and they lodge into our minds, right?
Right.
Until we mature and then we draw back on these inspirational images.
Right.
So as you evolved, you started to you had all this Magritte and Man Ray in the back of your mind, this idea that this is not a pipe. Well, it's an image of a pipe.
Right.
Right. And it changed your mind
right.
set and how you approached your art.
But I also had, back in that structure, I had my love of the Greek philosophers and the Greek myths and legends and the Platonic forms. Mm-hmm. I think the Platonic forms, circles, spheres, all of the triangles, all of the different shapes are so beautiful. They're a measured, logical, rational kind of a form, and I fell in love with them. And in this particular piece, I incorporated 2 equilateral triangles and 1 rhomboid shape and hooked them together with canvas straps. They can actually be uncoupled and unfolded, but in this case, most of the time I just show it in this form.
And the Platonic shapes have structure.
Yes.
And there's no, they are a specific way, right? They're a constant.
They're dependable.
Uh-huh. And again, we see how fascinating the art world can be in that the work becomes autobiographical.
Yes.
Okay. So from this theme, you started a whole series, and the next piece is a little more complex.
Yes. I had set for myself the challenge. I was teaching drawing classes, and in the beginning drawing classes, you end up working with point, then you work with line. So I set myself the challenge of understanding that a line could have multiple functions. So in this case, I took the 2 Platonic forms, 2 equilateral triangles, and in this case, those lines, the bars, are both connecting and separating. And then in the next shot, the bar is serving as a lock. Without that bar, in that particular position, the equilateral triangle on the left would fall over. Mm-hmm. It couldn't possibly stay there. Mm-hmm. Then in the next position, it's serving as a kind of a hand reaching out to support almost a ballet dancer on point. Mm-hmm. That particular equilateral triangle simply could not stay there without the help of those two lines. And then finally, the last image, it's the bars are serving as a support. There is no way that that piece could exist in space that way without those bars. And in one sense of the word, my grandfather is the thing that is supporting me and giving me stability.
Your grandfather.
Yes.
And helping to rise you above and give you that balance that you strive for.
Yes.
And it gets us back to the balance of the family as well, you know, and searching for that support network and that support system that's essential to all of our well-being, really, quite frankly.
Right.
You know? So from there, the work becomes very narrative. And we start to, you know, again, when you appreciate your work, I mean, one must truly look at the craft and the care that you take to render these images. I mean, they're exquisitely crafted.
That comes from Indian Bob.
Yeah? Good old Indian Bob.
When you're working, directing a department or working with any kind of an educational enterprise, you end up dealing with administrators who are not supportive. So I created this piece. On the outside, it's a sphere and it's painted in pearlescent pearl color. It's a perfect sphere, but inside, on the top layer, there is a set of canvas straps and buckles. You unstrap the top layer, and directly below that, there's another layer. Directly below that, after you uncouple that set, there's another layer, until finally you get all the way to the bottom, and you uncouple the last set, and you realize the pearl is empty. Well,
and this one is really a beautiful yet poignant object as well.
Okay, once again, the Platonic forms, a cube, in this case an open work cube, the function of a cube is to sit flat on its bottom and not roll around. The function of a sphere is to roll about freely. When you join the two together, back to this juxtaposition of disparate elements to create new meaning, once you join them, you cancel them out. And that was my situation where I was teaching. I simply realized that I didn't fit there and they didn't fit me.
And you moved on.
I went on.
And where did you end up going?
Went on then, I wrote a number of grants. I think I wrote 9 different grants. I got 8 of them. Most of them had to do with working with abused children. And this particular piece we're looking at now is called Rocking Landscape. And that had to do with dealing with a lot of the people in West Texas and New Mexico. Their idea of art was, let's do landscapes, let's do flower paintings, let's do realistic things. And I was doing some strange, abstract kinds of things, and I was struggling because I wanted to work with the community. And I ended up writing a poem, and it has to do with their attitude toward me and my attitude toward them. It's called The People's Choice. The man's insane, they cry again. Well, I've heard that refrain more than once or twice. Well, he ought to know by now that real is right and it ain't art unless there's a windmill right over to the left and some low mountains in the background and a old tumbly-down shack off to the right. That shapes and forms and abstract notions can't be used like doctor's potions. Well, you got to work at it. Well, I guess they're right. After all, art is a social disease and most people are immune.
That's a great line. Yeah. So, did you get fired from that job too?
No, I realized that the grant money was running out and we're changing our whole political attitude and the arts are not that important, and so.
So, this one describes very much what that poem conveyed.
Well, this has to do, it's called Rockin' Red Ram Face, and this is in my show at SciArt West. It has to do with once you go to an administration and they're not very supportive, and you're literally, I have my portrait on either end of the ram, and you're literally ramming your head against the administration's castle door, and it literally turns your life upside down. Mm-hmm. And it's very frustrating.
Sure. And again, these are, you know, when you really stop to take a look at the work, you just see these running themes and these biographical elements. Yeah. And now that you're able to talk so freely about your biography, you know, everyone will see your work in a whole different light.
This particular piece is called Rollerblade, and people say, Coach Bob, where did you find such a big knife? I made that knife. I cut it out of metal and ground it down and polished it and did the brass bolsters and the wooden handle. The only thing I didn't make was the wheels.
Mm-hmm. And it's an homage to your grandfather.
Yes, this is in memory of my grandfather.
And the grants that you referred to, you were working with children who were at risk, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us about that experience and how.
A lot of these children came from abusive parents. They were either physically abused or sexually abused. They had alcoholic parents. And so I was able to relate to them very well because of my experience, although I wasn't trained to work with children. I just treated them with respect and dignity, and they seemed to respond to me. And frequently they would ask me to create a work, and I created this work. It's based on a Langston Hughes poem. The poem goes like this: hold fast to dreams, for when dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. And when you look at this work, you can see the field frozen with snow, but you can also see a positive moon and a negative moon, and you can see a hand reaching out. But if you look very carefully, you will see a bird flying into the web between the thumb and the forefinger.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And in fact, it was through this experience that you've got your nickname, Coach Bob.
Oh,
tell that story.
Well, I would work with the children, and we would do different little projects, working with leather, doing tie-dye, doing different activities. And when I first started, the administration said, you must be called Mr. Privitt, which I thought, that's immediately setting up a barrier. And so I struggled with that for a couple of weeks, and then finally, one day I was working with a group of kids, and their immediate reaction, because they had failed over and over again, their immediate reaction was, I can't do it. And I would say, oh, sure you can. Here, let me coach you. I'll coach you a little bit, and I'll show you a few little pointers. And I kept using that phrase over and over, I'll coach you. And I would show them a pointer, and then I would turn and work with another child. And I remember Vadik Armandaris, who said, I can't do it. And I said, sure you can, I'll coach you. And I showed him a point or two, and then I turned to help another kid, and all of a sudden, I did it, Bob Coach, I did it. And they, in the Hispanic language, they reversed the noun and the adjective, and so everyone started laughing at him. And I said, wait a minute, it's okay, you can call me Bob Coach, or you can call me Coach Bob, I don't care. And so that's how that came about. Mm-hmm. And it's also has to do with my teaching philosophy. I'll do anything for you. I will cheer you on. I'll talk to you about your diet. But you have to run the race yourself. Mm-hmm. I believe in individual responsibility.
More importantly, in your experience in working with these kids, aside from coaching them and giving them these life lessons, you opened up their imagination. You gave them the gift of imagination.
I told them that they could do a number of things that they didn't think they could do, and I showed them how. This is the same way my grandfather taught me, and this is the same way that Indian Bob taught me. I showed them. And one of the projects that I asked them to do was to create a myth or a legend. And we had read a bunch of legends and myths. And they said, well, Coach Bob, we can't do it. Why don't you do one? And so I did this particular piece, which has to do with, it's a made-up story about how the earth got color. There was a big committee and all of the animals were sitting around, and finally a couple of the hummingbirds, Mr. and Ms. Hummingbird, decided that they'd had enough of committee work, and they decided to fly up to the sun, and so they grabbed a chunk of the sky. But as they got close to the sun, it scorched their throat feathers, and that's how we have ruby-throated hummingbirds. And so then the kids began to create some of their stories.
And your love for mythology, of course, is seen in works over and over again, and we have a wonderful example of the great story of Icarus.
Yes, the story of Icarus and his escape through the help of his father, Daedalus, which I think is a kind of an interesting analogy. But anyway, in this particular image, you can see Icarus, or Icarus, down below, and he's practicing, he's dreaming. And you can see the wings attached to his arms, the feathers. And then up above in the upper quadrant on the left and the right, there is a computer fan cover. And behind the fan cover, there are pictures of eviscerated birds, presaging his death. Mm-hmm. And you can also see a computer chip, a heat sink, there's a picture of a hawk. And then, but if you look carefully down below at Icarus, you'll see the feathers and realize that they are in negative form. Mm-hmm. They do not exist. Mm-hmm. There's only the illusion of feathers, and it presages his death, which is the blue sea behind him.
Mm-hmm. It's a great piece, wonderful piece. And the piece we're going to see was assembled in your backyard?
Yes, this gets back to some of my engineering experiences. Once again, equilateral triangles, spheres, tubes, everything is welded, but it is not welded together. Instead, each piece is based on tensegrity. Tensegrity is a concept. It's sort of, if you go back to Newtonian physics, where for every reaction there's an equal and opposite reaction. In this case, because these pieces weigh a certain amount, but they're hooked together with stainless steel cables, the weight of one is pulling against the weight of another, and it enables these various pieces to be suspended in space.
And this is a maquette, it's not a final piece?
Yes, I would really like to do it about 25 to 30 feet tall. But no angel has come along to pay the $60,000 or $70,000 it would take to create it.
It's enormously phallic, let's face it. Come on now. What else are you trying to say?
Well, Norma did say to me, Bob, be sure and use your manly voice.
There it is.
But I can assure you it is not phallic. To me, these are Platonic forms. They just happen to end up being in that configuration that everyone looks at them and sees something else.
Art is in the eye of the beholder,
right,
I suppose.
Right.
Okay, so, but that is an example of site-specific work, and we have another piece that is in permanent install at Pepperdine, is that right?
Yes, this is on the Pepperdine campus. It's called Malibu Pier, which of course there is a pier in Malibu, and it's also a play on the words looking, to peer. And this is an early X piece. If you look carefully at it, you realize that most of the shapes in there are Platonic, circles and different tubes and things like that end up being a Platonic shape. The X, though, is the difference. And that has to do with location, it has to do with affirmation, it has to do with a number of, it could be, for instance, in math, it's an unknown. Mm-hmm. It's also the numeral 10. Mm-hmm. So it has multiple functions, multiple meanings.
And the X becomes a body of work that we'll see in just a moment. But you have a poem that goes with this as well.
Oh yes, this picture is a shot of me with my evil twin. I'm on the right. The evil twin is on the left, or maybe yes. It's right the reverse. It has to do with my belief that I have multiple personalities, multiple things about my whole existence. And to reconcile all of those, it takes a great deal of energy. And there's a poem by E.E. Cummings that I think helps to summarize a lot of it. I believe that he had multiple personalities and that he was able to reconcile them. And it goes like this. A total stranger one black night knocked living the hell out of me, who found forgiveness hard, because as it happened, self it was. But now those two fiends are such immortal friends, the others each.
And the fact that you can relate to these poems, and words were so important to you, and literature was an escape, and your play on words, even when you title your pieces. I mean, this literary component is so interesting. That do you find yourself inspired by a poem, which then yes. creates a body
yes.
of work?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Very definitely.
So you find yourself with a sabbatical.
Finally, after 3 times trying for a sabbatical, I got one, and the original sabbatical had to do with going to Italy and working with the craftsmen, bronze casters and stone cutters. But that didn't work out, and I ended up going instead. I got a grant from the Borchard Foundation to go to Missillac, France, to stay in Le Chateau de la Bretèche, which was owned by the foundation. And this is a photograph that I took. And if you look at the very top tower, that was my studio. Not much bigger than this platform that we're on right now. 196 steps up that Witch's Tower.
No elevator.
No elevator. And during that time, because I couldn't do sculpture, I decided to do drawing. And it was during that time that I began to confront a lot of the trauma of my childhood.
Mm-hmm. And it's almost like all of the elements forced you into this kind of isolative, contemplative environment. Right. Because you were prepared to do sculpture, you were, yes. Preparing for sabbatical is a huge ordeal, and you have a concentrated 6-month right. period to concentrate on work. And then all of a sudden you get there, you realize you can't haul anything up 196 steps. The space is much smaller.
Right.
It is literally almost like a prison tower in a way.
Yes.
And you were held there. Yet there was this beautiful quality. You awoke every morning to this sight
yes.
from your bedroom?
Our bedroom was the former chapel of this chateau. And the light would bounce off of the moat and shine through the stained glass windows and shine on the ceiling of our bedroom. Mm. And this was a very beautiful, a very cathartic thing to see every morning.
And in contrast to that, the body of work.
Yes. This is a drawing called Box, 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 or 13 Hugs and Kisses. You look at the X. If you're a printmaker, you print a plate, and then you decide that you're going to cancel the plate. You strike an X across it. That cancels the plate. If you are illiterate and you can't read or write and you have to sign a legal document, you write an X. That's a form of affirmation. So I was dealing with this symbolism and this power of the X. And when I was a child, the only the only toys I was allowed to have were marbles. And so in the drawing, you can see that there is an X, and encased in the body of the X, there are marbles. And in the center of the X, there is an ear, fairly reasonably well-drawn ear. Then behind the X, there is my profile in negative form. In other words, I do not exist. There's nothing there. Then down below, there's another box, a shallow rectangular box filled with marbles, and across the face of it are the words box, box, box. But if you look at it carefully, you realize that the letter B is formed by the numeral 13. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The O of box is a ring, like a wedding ring. The X goes with the hugs and kisses kind of thing that you would put at the end of a letter. I grew up on the phrase, I will box your ears until they ring for a week. My mother used to slap me to the floor. 5 minutes later, she would say, come here, buddy, give me a kiss, give me a hug. I had to do this drawing.
Mm-hmm. And there's a whole body of work. And this experience, this 6 months, allowed you to kind of purge a lot of this out and
yes.
literally
yes.
bleed it out onto paper.
Right. In this drawing, this one looks at this one, is the title of it. At the end of each X, there's the numeral 1. Marbles, once again, inside. Around the periphery of the X, there are various phrases that have to do with different truths. One of them is, we could meet in the middle. I've forgotten the phrases. At any rate, they all have to do with certain things that are actually true. Mm-hmm. But then down below, there is an image of Siamese twins joined at the head. And the phrase, this one looks at this one. Mm-hmm. An impossibility. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I was dealing with a lot of the frustrations that had to do with who I was and what had happened in my life. And I needed to use art to create with.
And so they went from two-dimensional form to three-dimensional
right.
or relief forms and
right.
assemblage. So talk about this one.
This one is called So Much to Say. Down in the lower quadrant, there are computer keys that you can press. They bounce back, they don't do anything, but on the keys are the words, so much to say, enter. But if you look at the face, you realize that it has no mouth and no jaw. Mm-hmm. In other words, no way to say it. Mm-hmm. Now, as a child, I had no voice. Mm-hmm. My father was the voice.
And from there, here you brought this piece, which is very powerful.
This one is called Keys, Locks, and Tears. When I first saw this beaded chain, I saw it in an Army surplus store, and my immediate thought was a river of stainless steel tears. And that was basically all I could do as a child. I couldn't fight back, but I could cry. Mm-hmm. And I wept, and there was nothing else to do. So I created this piece where there is a set of keys bridging the lower quadrant. On the ends of the beaded chain, there are tiny locks. And you can funnel the beaded chain through the eye sockets. And it became the river of tears where no key would unlock your environment or your existence.
what advice would you give somebody you were to meet that may be going through something that you went through as a child or even as an adult? What would your advice be in order to handle some of these challenges?
Marry someone like Norma.
There's only one Norma.
Well, my favorite psychologist is Viktor Frankl. He endured, I think, 3 different Nazi death camps. He lost his wife. I don't see how he continued to exist, but he had three words of advice, and I can't remember all 3 of them. The first one is this is in order to find out the meaning in life, not the meaning of life. There's a difference there. To find out the meaning in life, learn to create something every day. Whether you're an accountant or a sculptor or whatever, learn to create something every day. And the second thing is find someone who is a significant influence in your life, who believes in you. And I can't remember the third one, but the first 2 I'm working on.
That you have a choice?
That you have a choice, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
A conscious choice not to repeat
right.
the behavior.
I think that if you go back and you look at the statistics, 8 out of every 10 children who have been abused will in turn abuse their children, but 2 of them won't. Why? And I think that it has to do with positive influences from other people, and I think that you come to the realization that you have the power to choose, and that gives you a great deal of freedom.
And power.
And power, yes.
It's very empowering.
Yes.
And allows you to take control.
Yes.
In an uncontrollable situation.
Yes.
Okay. So we have brought this piece to share with everyone.
Yes.
So tell us about this, Epitaph for a Poet.
One of my favorite poets is Langston Hughes, but I also value strongly Countee Cullen. Countee Cullen was also a Harlem Renaissance poet. And in contrast to Langston Hughes' advice, Countee Cullen had a different take on it. And he wrote a poem called Epitaph for a Poet, which prompted this piece. And it goes like this: I've wrapped my dreams in a silken cloth and laid them away in a box of gold, where long will cling the lips of the moth. I hold no hate. I'm not even wroth who found this earth's breath so keen and cold. I've wrapped my dreams in a silken cloth and laid them away in a box of gold. Now, is a dream deferred, a dream denied? I don't think so. I think that you can have a dream that will stay with you forever. I don't think he gave away his dream. He put it in a precious place, in a golden box. And I created this sculpture, but I was dealing with a lot of my own trauma. And I created a golden face, and I gave him wings. But one wing is perforated, and the other wing is made of lead. And below, there's a hardened heart. I wrote a poem that I can't quote that has to do with Icarus and how the reason that I think that he fell into the sea was because the feathers I loaned him were made of lead. I don't want to be that man. I want to give people feathers of light.
Well, and teaching allows you to do that.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about teaching and your philosophy of teaching and the gifts that you gave to your students.
Teaching kept me young. Now, with administrators and with deans, I was just like this. This is me over here. But with the kids, they were so much fun. And I realize that if you don't toot your own horn, it'll never be tooted. I think I was a good teacher. And I think the reason that I was a good teacher was because I remember when I couldn't do what I'm asking them to do. And once you remember, you're a dummy, you feel so stupid, then you're able to move back to where they are and walk along carefully with them to the point that then they say, as Vadik Armandaris, I did it, Coach Bob, I did it. Mm-hmm. And that's the joy of teaching.
Indeed. We only have a couple more minutes, so let's talk about this piece before we end. And it comes to the last body of work, the empty space.
Yes. This piece is called A Space Cut from a Face in Use. Now, that's a long title, but if you think about the title, you realize that this two-dimensional linear outline of my face indicates that I'm not there. This is merely a symbol for where I was. Mm-hmm. Down below, there's a heavy perforated stone, and that represents the burden that's gone.
And it's a pretty beat up rock, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, I just want to say this is a great interview, and it's a very courageous thing to sit and share such intimate details, but how profound it is, and how helpful it is to understand your work by having this insight. Mm-hmm. So we want to thank you very, from the bottom of my heart, that you're willing to be so open.
Part of the reason that I'm willing to talk about it is because there are people out there, whether in school, whether in this audience, whether wherever, there are people who have many of these same burdens. Mm-hmm. If you don't bring it out and talk about it, it will always be hidden. It will always be burning inside of you, and you've got to, I think you have to get it out.
And what better way to do it is not only talk about it, but to do it in art. Yeah. And art has saved your life. The only
thing is that I have so many other personalities. I could talk about my religious work, my myth and legend work, and my engineered work, and my human condition work, and my birdhouses.
That will be chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Oh, but thank you so much for being our guest. It's just fabulous interview. Thank you.